Hi, Mehwish. You're on mute.
Yeah, hi, hello, how are you? How's everyone?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great, I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you. If everyone's here, can we have the camera on at least for the introductions? It might be just nice to see everyone, and everyone gets to see everyone. And I think I'm going to do all the introductions, both the introductions together, so that I don't break the conversation in between when we move from one kind of archiving project to the other. I think that flow will also be very nice. Right. So, Mehwish and Richa, welcome, and thank you so much for accepting this invitation to be our guest presenters today. Um, I think I've spoken to them about why they came to my mind. That's because we were doing a proposal building exercise today, rather than starting off to archive, right? And I think the way they both have approached their projects in personal capacity, in professional capacity, is something that hopefully will answer or trigger new questions to all that we have been discussing since morning. Also, because of the kind of progress that they have made over the years, because I think they have been working on these projects even before they came to constructing personal archives. And this was in 2020 edition. So they are like the alumni of the program. I like saying this. You can completely ignore it if you don't like it. And yes, I think if I had to give introductions, I'm going to spare you all of the formal details which you must have read on the posters. I think what I really like about Mehwish's project, if I go first, is how I think she brings theory into practice. And I think it's very engaging. It also makes the project sometimes very complex, and I'm sure more complex for Mehwish to practice. And I think constantly the way you find ways, Mehwish, to go around those challenges and stay true to both theoretical and practice-based questions, I think that's where a lot of interest lies for me. And with Richa, I think it's completely opposite. Even though she's approaching it with a lot of personal enthusiasm, she's dealing with a really big, huge community. Oh, I'm introducing her and she got disconnected, but I'll still continue. So yeah, I think the whole engagement with a community and still wanting to build a project with personal enthusiasm, in the case of Auroville, I think has been Richa's I think accomplishment to even sign up for something like this. I think I can say this because she's not here. So I think these are my personal introductions to how they have approached their projects, navigated, and make the work so relevant for themselves, but also for others to look at. I will not take more of their time. Over to you, Mehwish.
Thank you, Ishita. I'm just going to share my screen. So
Yes.
let's try to do that. Perfect. So I'm just going to straight dive into this and pay my thanks to Ishita for including me in this presentation. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm thoroughly grateful also because I've been a part of this group as a participant, and I'm now here as a speaker. And I feel that the cohort gave a lot of enthusiasm for this project, and they also sort of cleared a lot of questions. All the workshops are very helpful to me, and I hope the same that it'll be for you. I'm just going to sort of dive into the presentation. This presentation entails a glimpse of my journey with my connection to the building of the archive, critical issues, and frameworks that deal with what an archive is, and what are the methods through which an archive can become a source of immense information for a bigger research problem, and how archives are used as a method of history and new knowledge generation, and how they feed visual art as a method and approach to the formation of collection for critical issues such as decoloniality, material culture, material and lived memories. I saw a lot of projects that resonated with what I have been learning throughout past couple of years, and I think you will find a lot of clues and connections with my project also. And I sort of want to invite each one of you, if you feel that there are any possible collaborations, or if you want to have any conversation with me, let's do that post this workshop and post whenever you find time and you want to. As a transdisciplinary academic and practitioner, I have been consistently fascinated with the impact of prevailing social, cultural, and political mindset on spatiality and design, and how the former symbiotically reflects itself in the built spaces, expressing not only the power dynamics within the built environment, but also dictating the terms of association and interaction externally. I'm also interested in the formation of new methods of immersion through material culture and experimenting with medium of sound, text, image, and objects. My practice is research based and roots itself in the theoretical premise of decolonial notion of investigation. And this is sort of a background to which I wanted to sort of set a premise that why my project is in a certain way and why different methods or different layers keep on arising. The said project has grown over last 5 to 8 years in various formations. There are two main formations that you can see. The first is a sort of a big proposal, which is a proposal for my proposed PhD, which is the idea of decolonizing home post mass migration after the partition. And the second one, the second project which emerged out of this bigger hierarchy of project is the decolonizing of home through objects. And these objects are material culture. And I'm also, and there are layers at times when I treat architecture as the biggest material culture also. This little sort of a map is trying to illustrate my process because I was also asked by Ishita to sort of deconstruct how I arrived at the project and what I was doing before the project. And it was also very retrospective for me. And this is very little and a very precise and a very simple way of explaining things that, you know, everything starts from listening stories. And that is how it started off for me about a decade ago. And I had started collecting heirlooms. I started fixing the heirlooms such as little jewelry pieces like gold pins. And, you know, if a pin was broken, I started fixing it with just adding the silver part in it and, you know, getting it, getting the gold water on it, etc., etc. And it started off with very micro and the very small objects, and then it sort of enlarged into bigger objects like furniture, like bigger pieces of objects such as bigger French bureau desks, etc. Then the process also indicates sort of my way, throughout my journey. And however, I feel that this process is still in its continuation. It's not something that I have arrived at the last point where I say that the collection started becoming diverse once the project intention was cleared. However, I feel that the objects are emerging again and again, and the project keeps going back to its first point where, you know, the whole idea starts off from listening to the stories.
Mehwish, are we supposed to be on another slide? We are all at the slide 1.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I am somewhere on the slide 5. I'm very,
Yeah, I figured. So that is
oops.
very, yeah. So do you want to just,
Oh,
we can take 2 minutes to see the other 2 slides. Yeah,
sure.
now we are able
Can
to
you,
see.
okay, so probably the full screen is not working.
No, full
Is,
screen was fine. No, this is fine. But just the slides had not moved. If you select the next one, yeah, now they are moving.
yes, but I was actually just doing the full screen and I was doing,
Slideshow, you will have to select
yes,
slideshow.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, yes.
I had actually selected slideshow, so I'm assuming that it's not working. Just let me know if it works. So you're seeing the first bit?
So slideshow, you will have to select slideshow from the screen share button of Google Meet. Because you have selected PowerPoint, it will continue to show us PowerPoint
Okay,
and not
right, right,
slideshow.
right.
Yeah, it
Okay,
is a
let me
little
just
less
do that.
intelligent than Zoom.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry about it. Let me just do it again. And I'm sorry about taking
No,
this
it's
time.
okay. Please don't be
So
sorry.
should I select your entire screen?
You can, yeah, if you can keep everything off that time also, entire screen will also work.
Right. Just
Or if
hold
you
on a
want to
bit.
select only a window, then you will have to select the presentation mode, which is a little tricky. You'll have to use Alter tab and do all of that.
Let's just try to do something easier. I'm a big fan of easy. So let me know if this works. So this is the first slide.
Yes, we can see the screen's slideshow mode.
Right.
Perfect. Yes.
This
Okay.
is just a little bit of who I am. Can you see
Yes.
the another slide? Yeah, right.
Yes,
Perfect.
we did.
So this is the process that I was talking about, that how sort of these two legs of the project emerged. One is a research project, which is based on my PhD, and then this is the archive that has emerged from that project and is working as a separate project. And is also sort of has diverged in to my visual art practice. These are a little this is a small map of how I sort of started my journey and what were the key points or the key steps for actually arriving at the at the point where I sort of had to set an intention for what the project is, and how did I actually sort of I'm able to understand that this is something that goes into the research of the project, and this is something that goes into the archive of the project. And I'm going to elaborate on this, that how are these two things differentiating from each other and feeding off from each other. So I hope that you guys were able to sort of grasp this. Uh, for instance, let me just map this out, that the project, which is the bigger project, and it is sort of looking into the change within the approach of designing build spaces across different segments of political history led by mass migration post-partition. So in this project, I'm dealing with a couple of processes and steps through which the project is unfolding itself. And this research is building itself as something which I extensively write about, and it is something which I extensively publish, etc., etc. And however, I would still again go back to the point where it started off with by actually collecting heirlooms, and how that very personal connection with personal objects and family heirlooms became this idea of actually building up a PhD proposal, building up this repository of objects, and started locating these objects in time, geographies, with people, etc., etc. So there are different mapping points of this project also, in which it started off as a proposal, then different lenses and frameworks were sort of looked into. I started looking at the sources, what sources are good enough for the project, what methods can be used to deconstruct this project, through which methods can one approach such an object. And then I went back to the ideas of ethnography, oral histories, and narrative building, because I was already speaking to my family. I was already noting down the histories, and then somehow also started building the archive of the material culture, building the archive through lived memory. You may say that building the archive of material memory through lived memory. So there was a lot of ideation on generational memories. There was a lot of ideation on frameworks of how memories and the theoretical frameworks of what memory plays a part in actually deconstructing these objects, etc. The easier part, or you may say that the thing that I had almost thought that it would be the most easy one, I thought that it would be like building up a website or building up a social media. But I have, till to date, I am sort of just gathering data for it, and actually intentionally not doing it, because there are still a lot of legalities which are involved. There's still a lot of processes that need to be looked into before doing that, because this project and this archive is not registered yet, which is the Archive of Decolonizing Home of Objects. So those are processes that are still left behind. However, the one mode of dissemination which I'm continuously doing is visual art, and disseminating the whole idea through the practice of bringing the whole idea of decolonizing home and the archive of decolonizing home into the visual art practice. Now a little bit of how how these bigger umbrellas also have these smaller umbrellas I sort of tried to like locate and map out a couple of steps in what was happening while all this process was occurring actually. So when I sort of concentrated on building the archive, because this archive is actually facilitating the project and is acting as a primary source for the project. So it started looking as if the steps were to enhance my skills. I started attending workshops such as Curating for Culture. I started looking for fellowships that actually could grant me some funds so that I could work on this project, because I was actually restoring all these objects, and I was all simultaneously documenting these objects. I was also photographing these objects and recording the oral histories. Uh, Other than that, the processes involve, assemblage of the archive into a visual and tactile digital archive, etc., which is still in the process. Then there are a couple of exhibitions that took place, which I've also sort of listed down here. The exhibition, which happened and sort of as a result of my fellowship at Harvard, where the project of decolonizing home through objects, which was bid as a archive project. In this exhibition, retelling and reclaiming had chunks of works displayed at the exhibition area, and it primarily focused on my current research on decolonizing home through objects. Decolonizing home through objects investigates the stories of migration at the time of partition of British India across borders in Pakistan and India. These migrations were not only intra-cities but also across borders. The project aims to ask questions about decolonizing architecture of homes in Lahore post-partition of British India. So um, I also noticed that Kostov had no entry point into her home. So this is something I wanted to make a connection, that this is my entry point into understanding what the home is post-partition British India. The archives envision creating an archive with the help of community through people's historical narrative and the participative approach that can turn into a living digital museum of tactile and visual memory. And sense of belonging also influenced the architecture and spatiality of homes that abounded after the creation of Pakistan. The archive also ventures into the material of contested histories, war material culture used in homes for space making and creation. So simultaneously, these two big chunks of projects are happening, where the exhibition becomes a way of creating new knowledge and generating new knowledge for the project, for the research project. The Visual Art Project proposed the immersion of observers with the archive by inviting them to interact with the artwork and become part of the installation. Through the activity of going through the archive of images, the observer was then invited to participate and contribute to the digital archive through narrative making and storytelling. The installation opened up a dialogue between the artist and the observer, between the archival installation and the memoirs of the observer. It brought forth the need to rethink and reinterpret the idea of the archive and the museum, and highlighted its importance for the creation of spatiality of home, especially in today's world where there are heavy refugee flows across, and with growing act of people's creation of their abodes and which they have left behind, and especially, if I may say, with the current situation in Pakistan, where at least 33 million people are displaced at the moment. For understanding objects under the lens, it was imperative to recognize the people who owned these objects and the context that they were settled in, the varied backgrounds of the people which were involved in these objects, and the archive, their localities, their education, their educations, their family backgrounds, etc., etc. They appropriated their spaces with material culture, and it is vital to establish that the notion why how the objects were creating the space in a home is basically one of my entry points into the bigger research project. In 1930s and 1840s, the need for becoming modern or the romance to be colonized for an Indian individual was to become European, as expressed by Chakrabarti. before the beginning of the nationalistic ideology in the region. And these are the sort of resources that I sort of started looking into, especially works by Gayatri Spivak, works by Chakrabarti, who have extensively written about post-colonial identity, because that's the bigger framework which I was looking into. The role of partition and the nationalistic ideas in governing people's actions with objects and their space creation was significant. This research envisioned creating an archive built with through people's historical narrative and aimed to bring forth the hidden and the raw voices, subaltern as Professor Spivak introduced them, as somebody on the fringes of the history, in order to understand the process of decolonizing home and to perhaps create new meanings of decolonizing itself. So the image in front of you over here is a picture of my mom in front of her newly constructed house in the 1960s. And the note written next to her is in Urdu. I think nobody can read it. However, this note sort of tells us a little detail about her memoir and her memory of where the picture was taken, what was the day, who took the picture, why was this picture taken diagonally, etc., etc. So what I'm trying to sort of also show here that not only just ethnographical methods such as oral histories, but also points where people are more comfortable in writing their memories was also sort of encouraged, especially when people wanted to not record their long, extensive interviews, rather just write small points and then probably think about it and then sort of give an interview. So there was this complete dialogue between creating these points of information. Taking a cue from Anne Stoller's critical analysis of colonial archives, the current archive is also an attempt to subvert the colonial endeavor that used archives as a tool of governance. The research does this by bringing together oral histories instead of the objective truth to bring light how artifacts always remain in the realm of contested histories. Constructing an archive is as much as a process of dissemination as it is a process of documentation. To build an archive that plays a role in decolonization, one recognizes the very subjective nature of the truth presented to the viewers of this archive. However, this archive also highlights how perhaps all forms of prior archiving were also a process of constructing a reality that suited certain aims. I have zero, not trying to offend anyone, but this is also sort of an attempt to probably can an archive also be decolonized? Are there other methods of archiving also? And probably different projects that I've seen today, they all seem to have different methods and different ideas within them. So I do feel that there is a lot of need and perhaps an ideation required on the methods of archive itself. This archive aims to play the role of what may refer to as affirmative sabotage, as highlighted by Spivak. The tools created by the colonizer could be used to recreate narratives that aim to decolonize. And this again is another photo of my photo from the collection of Decolonizing Home Through Objects. And this photo has been treated in its physicality and also while putting it into a digital format. And the chair that you can see on which this person is sitting is the chair that I am going to show you in a little while. The current project traces an intangible lineage tied to the objects residing in people's homes. The objects that are being focused on include heirlooms of families who have resided in institutions that carry with them a colonial legacy, such as railways, banking, and armed forces. And this is, I think, another person who mentioned about personal objects and material culture. I'm forgetting the name, I'm very sorry. I also wanted to make a connection here that this is something very similar between your project and my project. The objects within homes have played an important part in developing a thought process to critically examine the effects of colonization by living amongst and imbuing the use, value, and emotional connections to these objects. However, in a marked shift seen through generations that has been observed through the collected data is that some artifacts have not perpetuated colonial ideas. However, have been appropriated both in terms of materiality, design interventions by local artists, and craftsperson. And these were the three factors I sort of arrived at after my research. And these are also becoming sort of the lenses of why or not all of these objects which are here on the archive, here in the metadata, will not be part of the DHTO. Rather, those objects which have a colonial connection will become part of the archive of the colonizing home through objects. Because if they do not inherently have the colonial connection, that how would they be decolonized? These objects were categorized into a metadata that included covering the object photography to document the collection for their intrinsic rather than aesthetic values, making use of integrating oral histories within the ambits of archival material was deemed important to fulfill the task of decolonization. Beyond documentation of the material, the archive brings to light stories associated within the artifacts and highlights the evolving subjectivity of archiving. Within a broader framework, an effort is made to show how certain artifacts' perceptions evolve with time through the notion of generational memory. The installations throughout different exhibitions that I've had so far, they all follow a format wherever they're displayed or curated for a show. It focuses on the object through means of archival and object photography, and particularly taking away its aesthetic value and examining the object as a diagram, as a two-dimensional document in an archive, and at the end of its preservation and attained rescue through the rules of restoration and preservation. However, it expands into documentation through photographs of the process it has gone through, while making actually the process of the archive, or you can say while making the archive of the object itself, the archive of the restoration of the object. Each object in this series is accompanied by a narrative in the form of a text that has helped these objects relive and retell their stories. These narratives and stories are still in progress and have been developed with the help of original owners and the families of the objects in the collection. Over here, the text accompanying the objects takes the role of leaping through time and memories and in actually constructing the archive. And this is to just sort of give a glimpse of how I'm sort of deconstructing one of the objects. So I will sort of expand on one object from the collection. Muizuddin Sheikh recliners are from Khan Bahadur Muizuddin Sheikh's collection, Director Indian Railway Board, and first chairman of Pakistan Railways. The inference is that he must have bought it in Delhi and he was based there before partition in 1947. He, along with his wife Rabia, came to Lahore in 1948 on a special train. Farid Rabbani expressed that these chairs were made in Delhi before 1945. Farid Rabbani is my father-in-law. Rabbani inherited these chairs from his mother's maternal aunt, that is Khala Rabia, around 1895. After the passing of Muizuddin, his wife shifted to Lahore and brought with her these objects. Khan Bahadur Muizuddin was very fond of wooden furniture and he had a diverse range of collectible pieces. When he migrated from India in 1948, he brought with him this precious piece, later inherited by the three sons and one of his namesake daughter. These objects that migrated from Delhi post-partition are now in possession of Najma Sheikh, Shaheen Sheikh, and Farid Rabbani. Excuse me. Khan Bahadur Muizuddin Sheikh was an Indian civil servant officer. His father-in-law, Bahadur Hafiz Ilahi Bakhsh, also was also had some colonial connections, and both were the holders of Medal of British Empire. Over here, what I'm trying to sort of entail is this, that by understanding these sort of narratives, the idea of decolonization, it entails a process of becoming as opposed to an event. There is a need to bring forth everyday artifacts that evoke memories of colonization, especially also, looking at the people that were inherently connected with these objects. Colonial exchange has not been a one-way street where artifacts from Orient were brought to the West. It also occurred vice versa. Generational memory tied to the post-colonial discourses have evolved from earlier, let's say, colonial discourses, from discourses of nostalgia perhaps, and generating a discourse and writing about East was a task of colonization. And this can be reversed if taken up by the people of the East, which I'm trying to sort of do. Objects serve as a symbol to enable us to look at the social effects of colonization through a critical lens. Now I will sort of show you a range of objects that have gone through processes of restoration, oral history, object photography, documentation through drawing, and mapping of memories forensically. The other methods include getting connected to personal connections through WhatsApp chats, getting voice notes over WhatsApp chats, people writing about their memories in the language they are comfortable with. And very intentionally, I'm not going to go into the stories and the narratives that each object holds. This is one of the chair that was restored. Later on, its narrative was created over months and months from 8 to 9 different people, family members. Um, this is another pair of chairs that was reclaimed, and then it was restored, and the narratives were developed by the help of people. Uh, Drawings have been a very important part of my project, and also of both the research project and for the building of the archive. So I also treat these drawings and these very construction drawings as a part of the process, and also as part of the archive of the object. This is one of the desks that was made in 1970. And this is sort of an important point over here, which I want to make, is this: that while actually, uh, uh, since I'm not going into the narratives and the stories and the histories of each object, but an important point is here that while I did that, I sort of unlocked a lot of other gaining points, which were telling me a lot about the, let's say, what was the social impact and what was the political ideologies of that time, etc., etc. And those started also coming out, and those key findings, became part of the narrative. And that narrative also sort of became a living writing piece, which kept on growing and growing till the whole series of interviews was done. An important feature of all these objects is this: that these objects are still in use. They are in use by my family, or they're used by me, and they're continuously um, maintained, and they're not in some sort of cabinet of curiosity. So this also sort of takes it away from the idea of a complete colonial archive, and sort of also brings it into a space of a space of home, and also sort of dialogues with what sort of a history it had before, and what sort of a lived experience it's having right now. This is again how an object was received. An interesting point while restoring these furniture objects is this: that not necessarily all the objects were restored in their complete actual formations. However, they were also dealt in a way that not to take away whatever has happened to those objects, but also the key narratives which had actually brought in, that not necessarily all the trains that came from India to Pakistan had dead bodies in it, but there were other experiences of migration. So some key points of experience of migration also sort of surfaced while actually looking into mapping the history of this object. And then this is how it sort of grew into just exactly how our objects are treated in a museum, where you would see that V&A and the other British Museum, etc., etc., and whatever part is missing, they sort of leave the gap. However, I wanted to sort of keep it a little different from that approach, and I sort of actually just built this stand on which that one object could stand on, and actually have a mirror attached into it, so that it sort of also tells about the losing and the time which is lost from this object. Another piece. This is also the collection actually has furniture, silverware, jewelry. Some objects are restored at the moment, and this was sort of I wanted to show you some objects which are still in the process of getting restored. But before they are restored, I photograph them and document their current states. Then how some objects are inherently part of colonial connections, and how they are reconstructed by their daily use, etc., etc. This is sort of to show you a complete range of different photographs that have become the archive of pertaining to each object, and they're even while they are restored, and even while they're in the workshop, different sort of photograph. I keep on photographing them, and I sort of want to maintain that idea and maintain that conversation of how that object is regaining its shape. Then again, this is the project and its current state. So I'm sort of looking into people and actually covering a lot of narratives about these objects. Sort of also looking into old photographs where these objects can be located. Well, this baby is me. I missed that information. This baby is me, and that's my grandfather. Uh, then again, old photographs, how they're actually telling me about the architecture that was placed in these old photographs. And lastly, the war objects and the material culture pertaining to war. So this is, you can see a recurring, in the background, this one big container, which is reappearing. And this container is actually an artifact from 1965 war. And post that war, these containers were auctioned, and they were people could take it, and this container was brought at home. It was actually used to create a outhouse, and later, at first, this was actually used as a transport lorry, and then it was turned into an outhouse for the boys, which you can see in the middle, and the right picture. And how then when that use was over, how the same wood was used to create this sofa chair that's in the bottom right. So that sort of this, I also want to sort of map the life of that object, and in order to also sort of create that whole archive of decolonizing home through objects. And this is some sort of just to give you an idea where these objects are placed in my house, and how they are locating themselves in, and creating new lived memories. Resources have been very important for me to carry out both the archive and the projects. And these books that I have sort of mapped are also part of the archival collection. Then again, different ways of curation of the project. And this is the project which was curated by Ishita herself, and how this project completely took away from going onto the wall into the box, and had this whole experience of an archive. And later on, it sort of also went to another length where where photograph of the people were mapped, whose objects I had actually mapped, I had restored, and later on, sort of usage of archival box, and giving the whole experience of an archive, etc. And then again, these small boxes contain complete documentation, and these are just an example of how the texts are being developed in respect to each and every object. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mehwish, for packing all of this into a 30-minute presentation so beautifully. And I'm glad to see things which I also don't know of, the new lives that each project has lived. I think also your distinction between the research project and the archiving project, I think, addresses some of the questions which came up in the morning. And hopefully we'll address them in further detail tomorrow. So thank you. Anybody has questions for Mehwish? Let's start putting them in the chat box. So once Richa finishes, we can take up Q&A immediately and wrap up by 5. Richa, over to you.
A fantastic presentation, Mehwish. Thank you for sharing it all with us. Thank you so much. And thanks, Ishita, for putting it all together. This program, I'm reminded of our times, 2 years ago. It's lovely. So yeah, I'll get to the point, and I'll kind of what I was discussing with Ishita yesterday. That I would like to talk about the genesis of my project Auroville Timelines, how it all began, and where is has it come to as of today, over past 2-3 years that we are sort of engaging with it. Just one sec. Hold on. I'll try to. Just give me a minute. Is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Are you
So
going on slideshow mode, or you want to keep
no,
it?
no, I don't want to go on a slideshow mode because I don't have many slides. I have to get to the videos actually.
Okay,
The small
sure. Yeah.
episodes.
So you
Uh,
might just want to close that right side box so that we can read it a little more legibly. You know, there's something called format options, which is open on the right side. Just click on the cross next to format options on your right.
there is.
Just see under the share button. There is
Yeah.
a dialog box which is open. It will
Yeah.
just no, it didn't happen. I think so. What we're seeing a smaller size of your slide. Ah, yes, yes. Now we
Yeah.
can see the bigger version. Yes, great.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. So we came actually in Auroville 5 years ago, and the whole idea of our entry into Auroville was through the material that we found by chance, two old hard disks which contained archival material from the formative years of Auroville. It was absolutely by chance. The hard disks were in a box that were totally in dust in a computer that was covered with cloth in a studio which was locked for I think 2-3 years. So that was the entry to Auroville. Auroville is this intentional township in the south of India, and currently it's going through a crisis because of the developmental plans that have been undertaken by the Auroville Foundation under the Ministry of Education, Government of India. So there is a master plan perspective 2025 in place, and the development of the city is expedited, which creates a huge conflict among the residents of Auroville, the community of Auroville, of which I am a part. I am an Aurovillian now over the past 3-4 years. So there is a faction which believes in the development of the city, and then there is a faction that believes in the restoration of the forests, the eco forests, or the eco village that has kind of cropped up over the past 50 years. It is in this context that Auroville Timelines project is anchored as of now. But this was not the case when we began with the Auroville Timelines 3 years ago. 3 years ago was the 50th anniversary of Auroville. Auroville was founded in 1968. 4 years ago was the 50th anniversary of Auroville. And as a part of the 50th anniversary celebrations, and also as a part of us getting into the community of Auroville, that we initiated the Auroville Timelines project, which is basically collecting and curating the recorded memories of Auroville. And we were looking at giving it a shape and a form. I am a documentary filmmaker, and we thought that we would need to break free from this film form, which has a very specific direction, which is a narrative which is built by the director, which leaves very little room for narrative to grow organically, for strands to come in and strands to kind of fade out as the project develops. It becomes it's a very dynamic project when it is beginning, but it kind of becomes static. There is no growth once the film is released. So we were looking at forms to work out beyond the film form, and that is where the form of video art installation and audiovisual archiving and a digital sort of a gallery sort of emerged. So there was this project that we did. I'd like to read this out. Televised memories become mirrors of mnemonic mirrors of the dream, repeating themselves to redundancy. Filmed realities break free from the film form and the director's tyranny. Imagination becomes the only refuge, and that is how sort of it is. So, how did we kind of process the archival material, and how did the project organically evolve? So, there is another bit that I would like to show, uh, because the footage has hundreds of hours of it. Nobody has the patience to go through those many hours. Like, there were 2 TB of material with it. It was more than 125 hours. So how do I make sense of those 125 hours, and how do I kind of present that as something that could be viewed and annotated or referenced through by other people? So there was an element of curation. There was an element of selection inherent in the archival project that we were dealing with. Particularly because it was audiovisual archives, and particularly it was a huge streams of audiovisual material. So there were bits that we sort of thought of processing. I'll share it with you. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, just give me a minute. So I'll try to play some videos which were working out in loops, which we intended to work out in loops, which would have no beginning and no end, which would practically go on playing in loop, and will give the viewer. It will give the viewer to meditate on the image, and then those who are Aurovillians can think of can I mean can be the memories will be incited for those who have lived these times. And then those who haven't lived these times, those who are outsiders and visitors or guests or explorers in Auroville, for them, the imagination will be incited. So there are these gaps which our mind fills up, and we tried to create those triggers, audiovisual triggers. We curated those audiovisual triggers out of a huge stream of the audiovisual archival material to kind of incite either our memories or our imagination, and to fill in those gaps in between, because all of it was not possible. So I will just play these videos a bit, and kind of then we can carry forward the conversation. So you see, this is sort of an endless loop. It has kind of no beginning and no end. And by itself, it doesn't say anything. By itself, it only raises sort of a curiosity and a sort of a question mark as to what it is. This is Matri Mandir. It is the center of the Auroville city, and what they call the soul of Auroville. But it is one of the videos. Then I will kind of move on to some other videos. Let's say, for example, this man running.
Humanity is not the last rung of the terrestrial creation. Evolution continues and man will be surpassed. It is for each individual to know whether he wants to participate in the advent of the new species. For those who are satisfied with the world as it is, Auroville obviously has no reason to exist.
So you see, so these are meditative loops which kind of give a sense of time, a sense of space, and a sense of character. Now, all these loops, maybe 50, maybe 100, maybe 1,000, all of these loops put together sort of create a time capsule. And you enter that time capsule and you get a sense of time of the formative years of Auroville.
Evolution continues and man will be surpassed. It is for each and
So when I was particularly dealing with the archival material of Auroville, so many hours, and not all of it could, I mean, if I were to just give the hard disk to somebody, it would not make sense. So there was an element of processing, there was an element of curating, and there was an element of artistic selection and installation with the material. But then also how to kind of make sense and at the same time still leave room for inclusion, and kind of make, and still in spite of leaving room for inclusion, there is still some things which are excluded in the process of this archiving and curation. And then how do you include the excluded material in the archive, which is by way of memory and by way of imagination, by kind of creating the existing material such that it triggers the memory of that which is non-existent, or at least the imagination of that which is non-existent. So it is in that sense we try to curate the audiovisual material in a sense in what we are calling as Auroville Timelines. I could show 3 or 4 more, and then we could move on to the next bit that I would like to show. I will just kind of show 2 more. And these are abstract, and they are kept as abstract for a specific reason, because we wanted to leave, and they appear to be abstract, but actually they are very specific. They are so specific in terms of what they are saying, in terms of their physicality, in terms of their material presence, and in terms of a stamp of time that they have on them, that it becomes so specific and so minute that the larger picture becomes a picture that one really has to step away from, or kind of get a sense of a whole with the help of sense of these minute little parts like pixels actually, to make a sense of the whole picture. I'll just show 2 or 3 more, or maybe 1 second. Like for example, this baking of bread. The man endlessly, because there were no, the formative years of Auroville were extremely difficult, and people were not only making their own forests and raising their own plantations, they were baking their own bread, and the self-sufficiency of the people is what is kind of, and these are like these endless processes.
In the general organization, not by an increase in the pleasures and powers of life, but by increased duties and responsibilities. In this place, titles and positions would be replaced by opportunities to serve and organize. The bodily needs of each one would be equally provided for, and intellectual, moral, and spiritual superiority would be expressed in the general organization, not by an increase in the pleasures and powers of life, but by increased duties and responsibilities.
So you see, there is no beginning and no end, which is how it was. It was an endless act of making bread for people who were digging, ground, for people who were putting saplings, or for people who were building huts or things like that. Or some clips like these. A very organic sort of a forest life that is mixed with the life of technology. A chameleon on a motherboard. Now these are filmed realities which will not find any room in a film form. But that does not mean that they have no life, or they cannot be deciphered, or they have no meaning, or no context, no value. So then how to articulate the value of such material in a larger context of memory mapping and social memory? or this like in terms of architecture, the innovative space design of Auroville.
I really like this shape. I like the flowing lines. I like the curves. And sometimes people visiting notice that and feel there's something nice here and something feminine. I really like this shape. I like the flowing lines. I like the...
Yeah. So how would these, I just showed few, 3 or 4. We have hundreds of such excerpts from a huge stream of audiovisual material which we have been processing over past 2 years. So by itself, they kind of would be abstract. But when you put them in a context, in a setting of video art installation, which is what we tried to do here, we had called the exhibition a tribute to the soiled hands and feet. So it sort of created a time capsule. So in each of these television sets, the loops were playing in an endless loop. And you kind of enter, this sort of an exhibition space, which is circular in nature. And you kind of go round and round and round. And then there is an overviewing sound. And it's sort of a spaceship that transports you to a time that you were not a part of, or that time is bygone. Those were the formative years, the 17s and the 80s of Auroville. And then when you come out of that time and you enter the contemporary time, it is a different experience altogether. You kind of make a sense of the space in a completely new light. So these are some of the stills from our video art installation. Each of these television sets were playing in loop the excerpts of the archival material, audiovisual material that I just showed right now, the glimpses that I just showed right now. So these are the photographs to kind of give a sense of how it kind of looked like, the exhibition. So these are the Auroville kids who had come on one of these days for the exhibition. So yeah, so this was, so this is how we kind of formed, a kind of sense or a kind of a form to a material which was otherwise done and dusted, which was there in the archive for people to refer to for namesake, but there was not real accessibility or not real articulation of that material, which was stored, practically stored in hard disks, but not people could not easily go and access those hard disks. Or even if one would access those hard disks, people could not directly make sense of that. There was a sense making and an image making exercise is what we sort of engaged with in Auroville Timelines. Just give me a minute, okay? So you see, this is what it was, more or less. So yeah, coming back to the point. One second. So because this is a session on archival intentions, I would like to articulate what was the intention or what is the intention of Auroville Timelines. So primary intention was to make sense of or to understand the community which we have chosen to be a part of. So for us, it was an understanding. It was more an exercise in community archiving and curating social memory, actually deciphering and curating social memory. And these were technically community archives, but these were They became community archive because they were contributions of somebody's personal archives into a larger community pool. And then as a part of that very community, how was I able to access people's personal archives and kind of make sense of it in sense of a community archive and a curation of social memory, community memory. So that was the first objective or the first intention of this project. Then, of course, to understand the formative years of Auroville, because Auroville is not any other city. Auroville is one of the only international township which is commended by UNESCO as a place for with an objective of transformation of consciousness and human unity. It's the place where people from 59 nationalities live together. And it's a 50-year-old, 55, 54-year-old city right now, which has a very specific intent. There's supposed to be 50,000 people, and it was built in the early years with the energy and the momentum of people, primarily Europeans who came from a countercultural movement of Europe, looking at Eastern philosophies and at Eastern, worldview. And the founder of Auroville, based on Sri Aurobindo's principles, she channelized their energies to form or to put them into use of this building up of a township. And so there is a specific history to this city. So how were the formative years of this city? So that was one of the intentions to build up this project, Auroville Timelines, and also to understand the spirit and the ethos and the very intent of this intentional city through these formative years. The other intention was to curate recorded memories of Auroville and to bring them into public domain so as to reignite the social memory of Auroville and to ignite the public discourse about the intent of the city through the identity of the citizen. So while we were trying to articulate the intent of the city, we were also trying to identify and articulate the identity of its citizen, the Aurovillian, what we call. So Auroville Timelines' intention is sort of to kind of, it sort of developed beyond the purpose or the principles of archiving, and it got into an artistic zone of interpretation, exhibition, and installation. So I would say Auroville Timelines has kind of transcended that territory of archiving, and somehow by default or organically entered into the territory of artistic interpretation and articulation. That is where we are right now. One second. So if you were to ask me what is the scope of Auroville Timelines project, so we have identified for ourselves the following scope of Auroville Timelines project. One is the engagement, continued engagement with the archival material of Auroville, which is collection and curation of the recorded memories of Auroville, and to artistically interpret them and to articulate them. So that is one aspect of Auroville Timelines project. The other aspect is documenting the current affairs of Auroville. One is the past. Now we are at the present. So and the historic events are unfolding at present with the 50th anniversary of Auroville, and right now we are at 150th anniversary of Sri Aurobindo, who was one of the on whose founding principles Auroville is articulated. That kind of has expedited and accelerated the implementation of master plan, which means the development of city. So a certain sort of a development is kind of, accelerated in Auroville, the building up of roads, the building up of certain infrastructural pieces, and the entire conflict it has generated, or excitement it has generated among the Auroville community. So there is an unfolding of events and a documentation of those current affairs of Auroville, events and actions which are historic in nature. That's the second aspect of Auroville Timelines project, which we are doing at present. The first 2 years we were extensively working with the archival material of Auroville. 2021, end 2021, 2022, beginning onwards, we are slowly trying to get into the documentation of current affairs and the current events of Auroville. So that's the phase where we are in at present. That's what is our current engagement as of now. We are not perfect at it because it's a bit scattered, and access are issues, and there are certain challenges. Of course, there's a polarity, and us being community members as insiders, outsiders, this side, this politics, that politics, all of that put together. But it's an exciting territory to be in as filmmaker, as a documentarian, and as an archivist, audiovisual archivist. So that's the territory we are in at present, with its challenges, difficulties, and its fruits. We are there right now. What we intend to do, that the rest three aspects, the further scope of Auroville is a matter of intention, which we have not stepped into, but we wish to step into. We wish to grow in that direction. We have articulated the intention, the action, or the breakthrough actions, or the plan of it has to kind of be worked out right now. But what we do need to get into is also kind of engage with the public image of Auroville. Like my partner, he rightly pointed out, that as Aurovillians, we think of Auroville every day, every night, and we are very careful while speaking or projecting Auroville, or there is a certain amount of propaganda in Aurovillians' projection of Auroville, because Auroville is an intentional city, and the intent has to be projected, not necessarily the reality, because the dream is so strong and so well articulated. The dream gets projected over and over again, and not the reality. But the reality does not escape. The reality cannot escape. And the reality, or a semblance of reality, gets projected by the visitors and the guests of Auroville who come to Auroville, who visit Auroville, and they get fascinated by Auroville for a brief time, maybe few hours, maybe few days, maybe few weeks, and they do their vlogs and they take their pictures and they float it on social media. And that becomes the image of Auroville. And that image gets perpetrated in Auroville, about Auroville, and people who kind of just type Auroville right now on Google, and what you see, that becomes the image of Auroville. So how to kind of engage with that image of Auroville, how to decipher that image of Auroville, and how to include that image into the larger image of Auroville that we are trying to work out. So that is one of the scopes that we have articulated for our project. We are not doing it right now because what we are doing is documentation. We need to be able to do that as well, and that's in the scope that we are trying to work out. Another thing, so yeah, as I said, the archival material, the current affairs, and the public image of Auroville. These are the three things. Other three things that we need to work out is the interviews and the character portraits of Auroville. Like when we are in filmmaking, what makes a film, or what works out in terms of a narrative is Sthan, Kal, Patra. Place, time, like space, time, and character. So we are trying to work out the character portraits, interviews and character portraits. So who are these iconic citizens of Auroville who have kind of had decision-making roles in the building up of the city, and who have very strong ideas and ideals of Auroville, and who are influencers in an Aurovillian framework. So the character portrait of such strong individuals, citizens of Auroville, the influencers who are in Auroville, their interviews and their portraits will make up a huge body of what Auroville is all about. They will reflect light on the presence or the identity of Auroville and Aurovillians. That's the fourth part that we are trying to kind of explore. It's the scope of our work. Another scope of our work is the portrait of space. Like there are these iconic structures in Auroville, which make Auroville, give Auroville its charm, or give Auroville its mystery, or there are histories, based or woven around these iconic structures of Auroville. So what are this is the portrait of space that we are trying to work out, where we kind of have a profile of various iconic structures in Auroville. Architect, basically, like Rohan was here and Rohan was talking. What if we look at architect as a costume, architecture as a costume, not architect, architecture as a costume of the person who is embodying that, who is living in that space. And in that sense, what does space do to your identity and to your being? And how do we kind of portray that space? What are the spatial portraits? So that is another scope of work. And all of this put together kind of creates a portrait of time in Auroville, which is basically Auroville Timelines, which is how we articulate the project of Auroville Timelines. Because, if you look at any sort of time, it has no beginning and no end. There is no beginning to where we begin, and there is no end to understanding or deciphering or interpreting or articulating times of any kind of space. And this is what then is the Auroville Timelines project, which is what we are trying to work out, which brings back to our very first slide and the very first inception of the Auroville Timelines project, where we said that we would like to break free from the director's tyranny and then leave it out open. So Kamal Swarup, again one of our teachers, he speaks of these rhizomatic structures of creation, where this entire thing, in the sense that a project which can grow from node to node. If there are several nodes, any node can kind of grow into a branch. Of exploration. So it can grow in multiple directions. It can be carried forward not only by us, Richa or Rivu, but it can be carried forward by different people from different nodes in different directions. So can such kind of a structure be possible, which is open-ended and which can be multi-directional, multi-direction? And only thing that we are able to identify nodes, and we are able to go from node to node, point to point, and it kind of becomes an organic structure which kind of evolves. And various people can be contributors to that. And it's not a project which is directed by a director, but it is held by a community of people, which does not exclude anybody, or that which is excluded is also, there is room for inclusion in terms of memory or imagination. So, and it kind of overlaps the boundaries, or this kind of jumps, hop, skips and jumps between archiving and artistic representation. Because I have always struggled with the idea of what is comprehensive and what is complete. And there is nothing that is comprehensive and nothing that is complete. But then the question is, what is accessible and what can be made more accessible to more people? So these are some of the concepts that we are working on. And none of it is, these are only projections. I would like to be very honest with you. None of it is complete or mapped thoroughly. But the archival material is processed, or has considerably processed, and there is an articulation and formation to that. And there have been exhibitions with that in Auroville. The documentation is something that is ongoing because the current events are unfolding in a very dramatic fashion in Auroville. The rest of it, the engagement with the public image of Auroville, or the character portraits, or the portraits, the spatial explorations or the spatial portraits, are something that are being worked out, and all of it put together will sort of create an Auroville, a sense of Auroville timeline, Auroville timelines, what we may call, and which I think would sort of have a rhizomatic structure which can work out, grow organically from node to node through multiple participants and through multiple contributions. So this is more or less what is Auroville Timelines in its concept, and its scope. Yeah, that is what I would like to say. I mean, I have a lot of material to show. Like I could show the.
I think we are a bit out of time. So
yeah, but this is more or less what it is as of now. Yeah.
No, I think again, thank you for both of you for such honest presentations, because I think somewhere it's important at intention building or archive building to understand how exploratory and how messy archiving projects can be, and not just in its first year or second year, but also all the way into 5 years or 6 years of your journey. But you're constantly defining, redefining the scope, the access, the logic of access, the logic of care. And I think, Richa, what you did with your presentation, it's quite fascinating how you took us almost into some very important abstract spaces also, for conversation within ourselves, but within our projects, what the participants are looking at. I also liked how you differentiated what you conceptually want to achieve, and you clarifying that the archival material is processed. So somewhere the archivist's job is done, right? And then the questions that you are asking are more of a curator's question or more of a researcher's question or an artist's question, depending on which position or role you're putting yourself in. Whereas it's nice where if I look at again Mehwish's presentation, she has already put the theoretical lens beforehand as a researcher, and the archive is sort of growing out of it, right? And both processes have their own merit, their own pros and cons, of course, and their challenges. So thank you so much. I think very, very important to have this conversation. Even though, again, for me, some bits of it were known, but some bits of it are still a revelation after 2 years that, okay, this is also how this project can be seen or can be questioned or can be positioned. I'll open the floor to the participants for questions, comments, suggestions, thoughts, clarifications about your own projects. I'm sure it was a lot of information as well. So we'll give you some time to even process it.
Great presentation, Richa. I loved how it has transcended from being an archive into a curatorial format, and those videos are just sitting in that computer within those hard disks. That is a treasure. And how those, in those loops, I feel that even if you see this contemporary video art, right? Uh, it's just exactly the same. And I also feel that there's so much resemblance um, with these videos, not from like really far past, but where the new cities would be, were thought to be made, and there was a complete marketing gimmick. But however, that marketing gimmick was not just how, very literal how it is these days, but also to show how it would touch lives and be meaningful. I find those videos to be completely mind-boggling.
Thank you so much, Mehwish. Thank you. It was not as organized as yours. You were so crystal clear. Mine is a bit all over the kind of little spaced out.
I think, I don't know if there's something in the chat. Sorry, I'm just going to look at. Yes, Shwetal, please go on.
So yeah, about the Auroville Timelines, is it accessible? So I missed a bit in the beginning, so I just had a question. Is it accessible when you're in that space only? I mean, I could see that there was that whole space that you had created with televisions and all that. So
The television sets are like, we hunted them down from somewhere, and some of them were constantly breaking and trying to have a mechanic right next to it to fix things, and to convert them to basically, anyways, all of that aside, the physical exhibition was there, but we are trying to look at how to kind of create a digital gallery. Because where do I keep all these loops? Where do I stylistically? One way is I just upload all the loops on YouTube into a playlist. That's one very simple way of doing it. But that might not be a very artistic way of doing it. So is there a way we can create a digital gallery, a website with different? So that is all of being considered right now. So yeah, what we are looking for is to create a digital space, an online repository, an interactive space with its various, so how can that structure be? where you have also material from the formative years, then you have material from the current timelines, then how do you link it to what's there in the social media, and how can it be kind of navigable from one to the other, and yet how can that be thematically linked, in terms of, let's say, looking at architecture, or looking at let's say spirituality, or looking at painting, or various themes, looking at governance, or looking at healing, the various aspects of Auroville, education. So how can there be these thematics, so they can be touched across these thematics? At the same time, they have a room of their own, in their own sort of spatio-temporal integrity. So how to create that digital sort of archive design in terms of a website?
Okay. No, I asked. I mean,
We don't.
it is still in
We don't.
process. The
Yeah, it's
thinking.
not. It's process. It's not begun, honestly speaking, because it's very difficult. It's not begun. So it's all there. The loops are all there in a folder. Okay, online. They can also be there in what we have is as a Dominion catalog. I can show you quickly, how a Dominion catalog looks like. So it's
Sorry,
there.
so Richa, I'm just going to interject because I think the question is a little different. So, because I can see that you're really trying hard, but I think Shwetal was asking if in Auroville, in any space, in physical entry.
In archives.
Yeah, is that correct, Shwetal? You were asking about a physical access, right?
Yes, yes. I mean, even what she was saying was fine, and what you said also led to knowing that okay, it's also physically available there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I think
And
till
we're
the
also
digital
trying to
is
make it
ready,
available.
at least somebody can go and access it in the physical space. That's
Right.
always a very important stop-gate solution,
Okay. Yeah.
But yes,
Thank you.
Richa, if you want to show the catalog, please go ahead.
I mean, nothing. It's just a form that one could kind of. It's just something
No,
that
it's
one
fine.
could
I mean, I
use.
was just trying to question from the work we are trying to do. Like, where does everything end up? Is always a question that I'm interested in knowing.
I think I
Because
figured.
I'm sure it
I think
needs
it's then this
it needs-
server space or a physical space, either of these kind of rooms or location where everything gets hosted.
Hmm.
I don't know if I can actually present a catalog. I don't think I can. I'm not able to bring it to. It's okay. Maybe I'll just share it with you.
I think that will also be 2 steps of a jump, because I think we're picking up cataloging in 2 workshops from now. And I think, as Shwetal said, that's not the question as to how will they access it. She wanted to know where it ends up. So it's a physical space or a digital server. I think that's very important for all these projects to keep in mind. And of course, I think what you highlighted in your answer is very also important, how the digital curation sometimes gets very tricky. And sometimes the physical organization, I have found it a little more easier. First, to catalog something in a space, say, okay, this drawer and this cupboard has this, and you can access it, it's under this category. But when you start thinking of the digital curation, the extrapolation that we are expected to do or we get into, either ways, depending on what our roles are, puts on too many layers of responsibility and checkpoints of yes and no. So I think that, Richa, which your answer brought out, even your presentation sort of highlighted it, was very important to keep in mind. That while we think digital is accessible, it's also difficult because you are catering to an audience, a much larger audience, I think, compared to knowing when you're doing an exhibition or in a physical space whom you are attending to. Anyone else with questions for Mehwish or Richa? So I have one. In the meanwhile, if anybody else has anything, please do raise your hand. And I think with that, we can close the guest presentations at least. I think I just wanted to be the devil's advocate and ask you to go back 5 years. Both of you, interestingly, have the same journey, which I didn't know, 5 to 6 years, 5 to 8 years, and ask you if you had to restart Have you ever sort of, in a utopian world, ideated on what else could be your journey with the archives? With the same project, with the same materials, with the same people, in the same place. But is there an alternate journey that you would have wanted to take? It's more of a fun question. So don't feel any pressure. We will not hold you by it. But is there something you would want to completely do differently?
So I will take the first lead in it. I would do this completely differently. That initially I started off with a like a lone wolf, and I started collecting these objects, started writing about it, reading about what I'm doing, trying to make a sense about it. But I did not look out, and I did not know that there are other people who are talking about the same things, or I could find some sort of cohort space, or some sort of uh, you know uh, a place where I could be able to make a sense of these sort of things. And those spaces are not necessarily that wherever you would talk about it, there would be some sort of collaboration, or you're going to get new ideas. But whenever you speak about your own work, and whenever you write about your own work, I feel that it brings a lot of clarity in it. And that's something which I started doing, like 4 years down the road, when I had already restored so many objects, when I had already, filled in TVs with the oral histories, which is problematic in itself, because, then how you're actually transcribing it, and what is happening there. So I do feel that that's one thing that I would have, that's something, maybe if I do it again, or maybe if I uh, would want to change, that's something that, to find some sort of same group. And just to add in here, and that's the bit I did not add in my presentation. I will be teaching this course, which is Decolonizing Oral Histories, as an elective course in a school, in the coming fall. And I feel that maybe perhaps that is also my way of getting it out there in the people, and getting it out there to get more voices in. And these sort of things could have been done so easily, even, if it was envisioned right from the start. Because all these projects which necessarily deal with the idea of an archive, they are not a lone wolf project. They will bring in, maybe it will come from one individual and it will expand into different people, or it can come from communities and, probably look into one individual, but it would always involve people's voices. That's what I feel strongly.
Wow, such an interesting way to put it. Yes, and I can't agree more that they are not lone wolf projects and we don't need to do it all by ourselves and feel the overwhelm or the stress. I mean, even though it feels like people are talking about it now, which is just because of perhaps COVID, because of the technology that we have. But yes, there is so much that was happening before. And it's okay now that we can't go back in time, but definitely those who are starting out or who have been in the midst of their projects to share and grow rather than build the projects. And I think, Devangita, this is where one of the reasons I feel that authenticity becomes a very big question, because the more you talk about sharing, the more you talk about extending projects from one place to the other, and you start seeing them happening in different places, automatically you are signing up as an archivist or a curator for duplication or for a certain lapse of authenticity, if there is any, right? Because now the documents are out there or you're discussing them. Somebody else can also have a copy of it or a print of it, and so on and so forth. And why is that not authentic enough, I mean, I know I'm getting into very tricky areas by opening up also this Pandora box, but I think it's very important so that it doesn't become a reason why we don't go ahead and share or work with archival materials with each other. Richa, what would be your alternative?
All the money, all the funds and the effort that I put into creating a physical installation, I should have put it on creating a digital installation,
Ah,
because that would have stayed. there was a huge amount of effort, time, and funds that were put in physical installation. And that lasted for 15 days and it had to be uninstalled. And now it is all lying there catching dust. So if I would have the same drive, if I would have used that drive and that fund that I was getting at that time to create the digital installation then and there, I don't think I would be struggling now.
Wow, I think this is a very different kind of a debate which you're opening up. And I don't know if anybody else wants to pitch in, but yeah, I think these questions about the physical experience of archives versus the digital longevity, which we're all craving for everything, perhaps.
But that might not apply for everyone. For example, for Mehwish, because she has material objects, she has.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Yes. Yeah. But in my case, I clearly had a very good chance of doing that then and there because it was audio or audiovisual.
Everything that you're working with is digital material. Yes,
Yeah.
You're right. And in that case, the other way to put it also could be that could it be an installation of the digital experience, which means the website is ready. And now the access to the catalog or the digital platform is what the exhibition is about, which is what we're seeing in the last 2-3 years with some of the projects that have launched themselves. So that you're not using the money only for the physical experience, but also for the digital. Yeah, you're right. And it applies, the distinction which you made is clear. Yes, it applies more so in your case because the archival materials are all in digital. Whereas in Mehwish's case, or let's say the kind of materials that Mary or Namita will eventually come across in the photo studios or in the painters' spaces, will have that tactility where the physical experience is as important. And then you are constantly in the debate of which one do you spend on, first. Yes, Mehwish.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add here that, for instance, that all of your material is audio visual, and uh, my archive has to deal with the material. But I am looking forward to creating a living digital archive of tactile or material memory. So I do understand your point. However, I do feel that the experience that you must have gotten through the physical installation will actually allow you to probably, look into the digital archive with that sort of, hawk eyes, which you might have not if you would have gotten to it straightly. That's just a little bit that I feel.
True.
That's very
Because
true.
absolutely. I mean, thank you for saying it. It's a huge validation because I remember people were actually entering that space and crying. It was actually becoming like a cinema hall where it becomes a cocoon in itself, an enclosure where you actually get transported into another time, and that experience cannot be replicated digitally. Very difficult.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add here that there is this really beautiful exhibition I saw at Radcliffe Institute, and it was by Gola Kaparas, this artist. And your work literally sort of reminded me of her work, and that, in a nutshell, that project actually looked at the intangible cultural heritage of stones, which were which belonged to this one particular community, and those were stolen from there and brought into the Radcliffe Institute and were brought into the let's say museums at Harvard. And the artist, what she did was that she came into that space. She mapped all those stolen objects and those stones. And what she asked with the curator, and there's a lot of back and forth with the curator, where she asked to gather the dust on the objects which is on the stones inside the museum piece, because in reality those stones were supposed to be placed in rainfall, and when the rain would fall on it, the certain community would pray something, and that was their intangible cultural heritage and their ritual. And she created a very small, this bit, sculptural piece from that dust. And when the rainfall time came, they actually lifted the cabinets, the curiosity of cabinets, the very colonial museum pieces of that piece, and they brought in the rainfall to put on that piece. And that was something very that's something that's like a history making sort of a point. And I feel that when you're bringing in those people, to experience that sort of a safe space, so it sort of like resonates on as a counterpart to that project. And that sort of also gives me a lot of goosebumps, because it's again also on the peripheries of how you're decolonizing the space of museum and the space of gallery and the space of curation itself. So yeah.
Thank you for saying that. I think in the morning I said this in my presentation as well, that at some point we'll talk in through the series of the workshops, making people or audiences a part of your archive, and how responses of your community are as much a moment of history as the material itself. And I think that, of course, it can happen digitally as well. It's not to say it can only happen in a physical space, but what I think we might be able to record better is the idea of emotions. Because I think when you said, Richa, the crying, I think we're jumping the gun here. I know it's too early for some of these projects to think about it, but the emotional movement that archiving projects can create is one of the outcomes, even if it's not what you are intending, but it's definitely one of the outcomes that keeps the project thriving, and hence can it become a part back of the archiving project. And so while you are presenting the slide, does it become important for you to keep saying the kind of emotions that people have felt and experienced of that exhibition while the archive building is in process? Yeah. I know this is a whirlpool of things. Yes, Shwetal, please go ahead. And we'll perhaps close with your question. Yes. You're on mute.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I kind of relate to a lot of things about emotions and instincts playing a role on how we put out our, and how our intentions kind of come through in the way we put out our information out there. But I wanted to go back to something that Mehwish was talking about, of like connecting to different bodies which do similar work. So Mehwish, were you able to find people who were doing similar work, and how was your interaction with them? Like, was it something that they were also looking forward to? Was there, as Ishita said, it's a tricky space, right? There is overlap of information. There is also this whole thing about uh, how much do you share? Do you want to connect? So
So, like I said, I did the lone wolf thing for quite a bit, for quite a stretch. But then eventually I started applying for fellowships. I started, and when you're at a certain platform and you're supposed to share your work, then you start sharing. Especially with the constructing personal archives, I was connected with Ishita, I was connected with Sarita ji, and I was through Sarita ji, I was connected to a couple of other people. Uh, we're still talking about objects and decolonizing those objects, or not decolonizing, but tracing the history of the colonial history of that object. So not necessarily that they were similar works, but they were also probably under the same banner, either material memory, or the same banner as in let's say post-colonial ideas, etc., etc. So through such connections, there were a lot of conversations and a lot of like, for instance, today I got to know a lot about Auroville space, and I'm just so interested about the architecture of that space. And I'm so interested about those time loops and etc., etc., and those, and even how she curated that particular one project. So in my brain, I'm also thinking about okay, ways of curation of audio into film, or how, if I can bring some sort of ideation into um, because I'm asking people to give me things in writing, or let's say just in photographs. So if there's some sort of a video, like an old birthday video, in which there is this one particular material object that's filmed, so maybe that can become a part of the repository. So these sort of connections, when you talk to people, so you can find these links. And for instance, just at this fellowship that I was in, I connected to a lot of other people, professors. They actually guided me through, gave me a couple of ideas. You can look into this, you can look into that. And then that definitely opens a plethora of different avenues for you. Secondly, I am now a firm believer of this point that whenever you share your idea with someone, and though I have been a victim of, sharing your idea, and the next day you see someone's Instagram saying that exactly the same thing and putting it up there as their research interest, that happens. It's all good. The thing is this, that the digital world has a memory. It will always be there. Your name, your dates, everything will be there. You don't have to feel bad about it. But I feel the probability of you discussing your idea with someone and having a great collaboration is far too much than having you know, than not gaining anything out of it. The probability of not gaining anything out of it and getting sabotaged is still a lot less. So, I'm a big fan of collaborations. I'm a big fan of discussing my work and, speaking very loudly about it.
And I think the
Yeah,
other
good
way
to
to
know
put it,
that. Very encouraging.
if I might, sorry, is that the more you talk about your project, the lesser are the chances of it getting sabotaged. So the visibility is becoming the answer to copyright issues also, apart from legality, of course. And now that we have these platforms to be visible, it helps. However raw and rough the content is. This is also the only reason I'm putting it this way is to say that we don't need to be too worried about it being all formed and perfect and then bring it out to the world, because the more you'll bring out, the more they will engage. Again, so connecting it to your question, Shwetal, in the morning, documentation and dissemination going parallel so that it generates a dialogue.
And I also feel exactly, I agree with something Ishita said earlier, that these projects will not necessarily ever be complete. They will keep on growing and they will keep on building themselves, or maybe take another form and maybe become another medium themselves. So I feel that it's very important when you have a certain sort of a collection, you start writing about it. And in my personal view, writing has been a big part of my journey. Writing and continuously publishing whatever I'm thinking, writing and publishing whatever I'm thinking about it. So I understand when you said that I'm a very practical person and I'm not into a theory, or I don't want to, I just do the thing. You're doing it, but there is definitely a big chunk of that thought process. So just that thought process is the theorization of that project. And that is, and publishing it would, give you that safe space to collaborate with people.
I was just saying thank you both, Mehwish and Richa, for making time, making the presentation, and patiently waiting for us to start late and end late. I know from Pakistan time point of view, also another half an hour added. So really, really grateful. And I hope that these discussions help you also in some way.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and all the best to everyone. It's a great space to develop your projects. Thank you. Thanks, Ishita.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye, Mehwish. Lovely to hear you.
Bye, Richa. Thank
Okay.
you.